Hello? Yep, it's working. Good to go? Okay, everybody, we're going to commence the meeting now. My name is Scott Fairgrieve. I'm the president of the Nassau County Historical Society. We want to thank everybody for coming today. We want to thank all the guests online for attending today. We also want to thank the Jericho Library for hosting this for free. They've really been fantastic all these years for us, and we really appreciate it. We want to thank Carlos for all the hard work he does with the video and audio. And I believe this program is going to be recorded, correct? And it's going to be online. So if you're interested in watching again or sharing with other people, you can. I would ask everybody, if you don't mind, to silence or turn off your cell phone. I just did mine. And I just think it's appropriate. We pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States. So I would ask everybody rise, or if you can, stay seated. And I would ask, Gary, would you lead us in the pledge? To the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay. I just want to, everybody can have seated, but I just want to mention that we should remember our veterans and people in active duty right now for the sacrifice they make to our country. So I just want to keep that in mind. A lot of people are sacrificing us for our freedom, and it's so important that we remember everybody. Okay? Today's program is going to be outrageously good. Major Tallmadge. I am pleased to announce that Tom Sanders, we have now organized a special program that if you're willing to pay $10,000, you'll learn to become a spy. We got Maxwell Smart and Agent 99 from Control. We guarantee you a job. So if anybody's interested, see Tom Sanders outside, and we'll arrange your training with Maxwell Smart and Agent 99. Okay? So just keep that in mind. And also, the next program, which Nadia will talk about, we're going to have a talk on the Battle of Long Island. Okay, and we are going to have our annual luncheon in October. We are organizing a special program for the 250th. I think you're going to find it really interesting. We're working on it right now. It's with Madeline Klein, who came up with the idea. And there was another idea given me the other night. We may do both. I got to see how we're going to handle it. But okay, without further ado, I just also want to thank Natalie Nella. Oh, by the way, I should do this. Board members, would you please stand? All board members. And I just want to thank all the board members for coming. It's really appreciated. And if anybody's interested in serving on the board, let me know. We need new people. We are turning this organization around. I can tell you right now, next month we're looking at a possible site for the Nassau County Historical Society. It's a possibility, that's all I'm going to say. And we're trying to get a handle on our collection, which is in different places, so we're working on that. So we're doing a lot of things behind the scenes to get this organization really well organized, well, like a well-oiled machine. Okay, thank you very much.
Welcome, everyone, and thank you for coming in person or on Zoom. We have been having programs this year on the American Revolutionary War era, as you know, and Suffolk County has put together a passport for various historical societies and sites, and if you want your passport stamped today, Gary Monte, one of our trustees, has the stamp for you. You can get that at the reception afterwards. Whoops, screen share. Carlos, we may need you. I just messed up. Sorry. Let's see. Gary Monte is the author of 2 articles in recent journals. Last year on vintage baseball, and the year before on the cradle of aviation. And I have copies of last year's journal. If anyone wants, is not a member and did not get the issue, I have some that will have available at the reception. Thank you. $5 for the in-person copy. But our speaker today, Richard Welch, a native Long Islander, and he received his doctorate at Stony Brook University. He's taught at Long Island University, Farmingdale State College, and written numerous articles, several books, including Long Island's Trade, 19th Century Shipbuilding on Long Island, Memento Mori, the gravestones of early Long Island, 1680 to 1810, Long Island and World War I, Long Island's Gold Coast elite and the Great War, and he spoke for us on that latter topic, I think it was 4 years ago. He was editor of the monthly Long Island Forum in the 1990s. But most pertinent for us today, he is the author of General Washington's Commando, Benjamin Tallmadge in the Revolutionary War. He has copies of that book that he will be glad to sell you, and it's not easy to find. He's currently working on a book on the 3 Tallmadge brothers and their role in the war. So please welcome Richard Welch. And I'll leave here before I mess up again. Thank you, Carlos.
Thank you, Natalie, and thank you all for joining me here this afternoon. And my topic is what you can see up there, Benjamin Tallmadge. Tallmadge, of course, is having a kind of a renaissance. He's almost becoming famous in certain circles, posthumously, obviously. And a lot of that, I think, has to do with the TV show Turn, which is a lot of fun, but please don't take it, as biblical text if you're thinking about history and that kind of thing. This is Tallmadge as the... To the microphone, like this? Okay, it's hard for me to bend over because I like to move. All right, I'll do me best, as they say in the old country. At any rate, this is Tallmadge as depicted by Jonathan Turnbull. Turnbull was actually a member of the Continental Army, and for a while he was attached to Washington's headquarters staff, and he did a number of drawings, renditions of Continental officers. You're probably most familiar with the one he did of Alexander Hamilton. This is Tallmadge at the end of the war, or toward the very end of the war, and he's wearing that very distinctive kind of headgear, which is called a dragoon helmet. The original ones were made of something called jacked leather, which is really just boiled leather, but we will see more depictions of this. In order to understand what Tallmadge is doing, we have to sort of take a look at Long Island in the latter part of the 18th century. And the island was inhabited by a somewhat diverse population, primarily in terms of its western and eastern populations. If you were in Kings County, what we sometimes refer to simply as Brooklyn, you would still find a very strong Dutch presence there. And in fact, the Dutch language is a living language in parts of Brooklyn into the 19th century. And they tended to be very focused on Manhattan, and they also tended to be very supportive of the crown, believing that the imperial trade was the thing that, made them their money as far as that's concerned. Kings was also interesting for another reason. It had really a fairly small population, but it had the largest percentage of slaves. Some say that the two things are connected, that the fact that there were so many slaves and so many slave owners meant that young people who were starting out, who were not slaves, had to go elsewhere as far as that's concerned. And so this part of Long Island is going to be very heavily Tory or pro-Crown or pro the link with Britain once the hostilities begin to break out in 1775 into 1776. As you moved eastward on Long Island into Queens, which would include today's Nassau as far as that's concerned, the population is somewhat more diverse and increasingly more of English stock. And once you get into Suffolk, you're dealing with an area which was primarily settled from New England. Connecticut and Massachusetts particularly, but the Connecticut strain was actually even stronger. And people in Suffolk tended, and in many instances, to look across the Sound to Connecticut for leadership jobs, let's say, trend-setting types of activities rather than look to Manhattan. And the truth is, in an age when the roads are lousy and going by water is easier, going across the Sound to Connecticut was about as fast as going into Manhattan. And this is also an area where you're going to find the Calvinist churches extremely strong. And what by Calvinists, I'm talking particularly about Congregationalists and Presbyterians. These denominations historically had tended to take what was called a Whig, that's with an H, W-H-I-G, a Whig political attitude which tended to stress the importance of Parliament, was suspicious of the prerogatives of the king or the stated prerogatives of the king. And this is the part of Long Island which will be most consistently in what we would call the Whig, or by our terms, the Patriot aside when the revolution actually breaks out. Doesn't mean there are no Tories there. There are some big ones there, but they tended to be Anglican, what we call Episcopalians, and most of the people essentially were not. Tallmadge's family actually, reflects this kind of tradition. The Tallmadges, his branch of the Tallmadges, is another one in the South Fork, which is a little different, came from Connecticut, and his father had trained at Yale College for the ministry, came across to Setauket and was later given the job, or the position, I should say, of being the Presbyterian minister in the village itself. And while this would not necessarily have made him one of the big money makers in the county or in the area, it did give him a tremendous amount of prestige at a time when religion counted for a lot, and also where the political dimension of religion was still fairly strong. Good, I remembered how to do it. At any rate, this is a contemporary picture, it's about 10 years old, of what was the Presbyterian parsonage. The Presbyterian church in Setauket, you can go have a look at it. It's right across the roadway from the Anglican Caroline Church. They must have, hissed at each other when they went out in the 18th and 19th century. But the Presbyterian church, which is there now, has been totally rebuilt because it was effectively trashed by British forces during the Revolutionary War. In fact, British troops frequently did that to Congregationalists Congregational and Presbyterian churches. The part which is the oldest part, that is, which Tallmadge would have grown up with, is on the right-hand side, which has been very much reworked, but nevertheless, the residence is still there. Tallmadge was one of 4 brothers. There were 5. One died in infancy. He had one older brother named William. Then comes him in 1754. A year later came a brother Samuel, and then 2 years later, if I remember correctly, there's a brother named John. The first 3 are all deeply involved in the Revolution, although in different units and in different places. And Natalie mentioned I'm working on something about the Tallmadge brothers, and the reason is because they have such a diverse, disparate careers during the Revolutionary War, and this sets them up for a very different kind of post-war career as well, or lives, I should say. It's a lot more than that. At any rate, Benjamin's the only one who goes to college. All right, his father gets him into Yale. As a matter of fact, his father had tutored him at home, and the president of Yale, who had visited in Setauket, going across the Sound back and forth, like taking the subway, and was actually willing to take young Tallmadge in when he was 13, but the father said, no, he's got to be at least 15 before he goes to college, and then he went over there. The other brothers don't get this kind of education, all right, and it showed in their handwriting, among other things. Over there in New Haven, Tallmadge begins to meet the sons, at least, and frequently the daughters. He does like the ladies, but he networks with a lot of the major families in Connecticut, people who are involved in things such as shipbuilding, trade, finance, and these are connections he's going to burnish and nurture during the Revolution. And one of the things he does do during the Revolution, and I'll try to get back to this a little bit, is he's also preparing for post-war world. He's very optimistic. He seems to think that, we're going to win this thing, even when things are looking really bad, and he's always investing, and he's always making connections, and this will pay off. All right, the Revolution breaks out. Where is he? He's in Wethersfield. He's teaching school. Wethersfield is maybe 10, 15 miles below Hartford, so he's close to the capital with a lot of wheelers and dealers. When they hear the word about the fighting around Boston, Lexington, and Concord, and then Bunker Hill, all right, there's a tremendous desire on the part of the populace to support the people, the Patriots in Massachusetts, and Tallmadge has a friend by the name of Chester who basically enjoins him to come and join my regiment as an officer, and that was an offer which Tallmadge could not refuse. It fit with his political inclinations, and he also probably saw this as a way to stay with his friends and to stay with the social group, which he understood. All right. After the fighting in Boston, Washington will move the army down to New York. The British evacuated Boston on St. Patrick's Day, 1776. They were afraid of what the Irish were going to do that night, and they decided to beat it. That's a joke. At any rate, they do evacuate it. They move to Manhattan, which is, a move which could be predicted, because New York has this tremendous waterway kind of link from Canada all the way down to the Atlantic Ocean. It's right in the middle, and the British frequently had this idea that the hardcore of this movement, which was resistance turning to revolution, was in New England, and if they cut off New England from the rest of the colonies, they could subdue the other colonies relatively quickly. Didn't always work in practice, but that's what they assumed, and then they could turn to New England. So it's understood where the British are going to go, and also when they leave Boston, it's understood they're coming back, and they do, with about 30,000 men and a fleet which was the largest invasion force until Normandy in 1944. And they are led by a commander by the name of William Howe. And Howe lands off Staten Island, and then later he will proceed to move to Brooklyn. He doesn't do so immediately. Washington is down in Manhattan. There isn't much to New York City above what today we would consider something like Canal or maybe even 14th Street. Greenwich Village is really a village, and Harlem is a separate village as well. In between, there are woodlots, pastures, farms, and all of that kind of stuff. How do you defend this city? No aircraft at the time, obviously. And how do you do it if the other side has total naval superiority? There is some evidence Washington actually thought maybe it'd be a good idea just to abandon it because you can't really defend it. But politically, that's impossible. You can't give up what was the second largest city in the colonies on its way to becoming the first, all right, without some kind of fight. So what George does, and you can try to look at the blue lines there, he figures that Howe is at some point going to move up the East River. And so what they do is they create a series of forts on the Brooklyn side of the East River, roughly where Brooklyn Heights is today. Fort Greene Park commemorates one of them. All right. Howe then is going to move from Staten Island. You can see he lands on Long Island August 25th. Now, where is he going to go? Washington sends forces out from these forts along the East River to where you see those kind of curvy lines. One looks like a fish hook, and the other two there, I'm sorry, I don't have my laser pointer. At any rate, why does he send some troops out there? Those are passes, and they cut through what was called the Heights of Gowan, from what we get the word Gowanus. And what it is, it's really a terminal moraine, and it was high ground, easy to defend, but the passes cut through it. So what Washington does, he sends troops out to protect these passes, so if Howe comes up, he's going to hit that before he can get near the forts, and maybe he'll be stymied, all right? However, Howe finds something out, and if you look up where that red line goes, there's a pass up there called the Jamaica Pass. Nobody covered it. All right, no one told Washington about it. Nobody told the general at the time about it. Where is Benjamin? Benjamin's in the center. All right, at what's called the Bedford Pass or the Flatbush Pass. His brother William, by the way, is on the far left, all right, near the Heights of Gowan. Howe launches his attack. Initially, the Patriot forces think, hey, we're not doing too bad, all right, and we're sort of holding them. We're being pushed back, but slowly, but that's a feint. The main attack is that long right hook that's coming up there, goes through the Jamaica Pass, gets behind the American line, basically collapses it, and forces the retreating troops back to those forts along the East River. William Tallmadge is captured in this fighting, and to get through it relatively quickly. The British treated American prisoners abysmally. If that happened today, you'd call it a war crime. He goes into a makeshift British prison, and he never comes out. Benjamin survives. He is back in the forts on the East River. He's there when Washington orders the retreat across the East River, and he's in one of the last boats. His detachment, they were sort of the rear guard. In fact, they were getting itchy. They were afraid they were going to be left on the other side and caught by the British. They get to Manhattan. Then there's a series of actions up Manhattan Island, because Howe will, and I think you can see it there, up on the top in September, Howe will send a force across what is today Kips Bay. He'll collapse the American line, and Tallmadge is in this. He and his men are fighting alongside artillery units, but the British Navy is blasting them to smithereens, and ultimately they get forced up and up Manhattan Island, and they sort of stabilize there for a while. Now, what does Howe do? Howe pulls his troops back from Manhattan, and then he crosses them ultimately at Pell's Neck. He tried a landing at Throg's Neck, didn't work so well, but Pell's Neck works, roughly where Pelham Bay Park is today, and he pushes the American defenders to the north, and ultimately they're going to dig in at White Plains. And at White Plains, you can see that blue line there, or a streak there, that's the Bronx River. And some of the old maps, they call it the River Bronx. It's got, really a much nicer flavor to it. At any rate, and Tallmadge, he is deployed, I'm too short to do this, but he's over here, if you can see Chatterton's Hill, right? You see those are actually, on this side, they're really Hessian troops, that is German troops, who are pushing up against him. And originally, Tallmadge was on the south side of the Bronx River. They got pushed up on Chatterton's Hill. And regular British troops are assaulting the center and the American left, but these German troops are working around the American flank at Chatterton's Hill, and they're reaching a point where they're about ready to flank it, meaning they're going to hit it on the side and, roll it up. So Tallmadge is sent to report to George Washington that the whole line on Chatterton's Hill is about ready to go. Now, had Tallmadge seen Washington before this? Yeah, almost everybody in the Continental Army did when they were drilling on Manhattan and when the Declaration of Independence was read on July 4th. He also saw him at Brooklyn Heights and later reported that Washington would ride up and down the lines trying to get, hearten the men who were feeling pretty despondent after being pretty well thrashed by the British that day. But this is the first time that we know of, at least, that, he actually went and he met him face to face. And unfortunately, he's not giving him a piece of good news. Washington then, as the American left where Tallmadge had been, begins to, collapse. He pulls the army out of this position and he moves it up further north in Westchester. Now, what does Howe do? All right. Howe decides that continuing to go after and, chase Washington all over the Hudson Valley is not really profitable. And so what he does is he reverses course. He goes back to Manhattan. He captures Fort Washington, which is where Fort Washington Park is today, roughly where the cloisters and that is. Captures a lot of men and a lot of supplies. On the other side of the Hudson, the British capture Fort Lee, and Washington is sent, backpedaling all the way across New Jersey with Howe in pursuit. And this is a digression, but there's a lot of debate as to why Howe at Brooklyn and other places doesn't finish Washington off, and there are many explanations for it. He certainly could have done let's say, a better from his perspective or a worse from Washington's job of bloodying him. Anyway, you know the story. December, Christmas Day, Washington launches a counterattack at Trenton, all right, takes a Hessian garrison, then defeats another British force at Princeton. It doesn't end the war, but it does give heart to the revolutionary cause, which didn't have much, to feel heartened about up to this particular point. It also forces the British to contract their lines. There are other realities which must be faced, and one of which in both Congress and the Army is you can't depend on part-time troops, militia troops, sort of like our National Guard. You have to have a corps of really well-trained officers, and you can't just enlist them for periods of 90 days. Or something of very short duration. And so the Continental Army is going to be reformed, and they're going to put together line regiments of infantry, cavalry, dragoons, artillery, which are committed to at least a 3-year enlistment, if not for the duration of the war. Tallmadge joins one of these, and he is appointed a captain in a new unit which is being formed, which is called the 2nd Continental Dragoons, sometimes called the 2nd Connecticut Dragoons, sometimes called Sheldon's Dragoons. They're all basically the same thing. The appointment is approved by Washington, but he rides to Philadelphia, the continental capital, and he gets his commission assigned, and you can see who signs it there. You've probably seen his signature on other documents as well, and he is commissioned a captain. By the way, relatively quickly, he is promoted to major, and he stays major through most of the war. He only becomes lieutenant colonel in the last days of it. Now, dragoons are sort of a hybrid of infantry cavalry. They're horsemen who also are trained that they can fight on foot, all right? And they do have kind of a distinctive uniform. If they were properly accoutered, all right, they would have had a blue uniform with white or buff facings, all right? However, throughout the Revolution, American units, even the regular ones, were dependent upon supplies from abroad, or the different states supplied them, or they got things wherever they could find them, so they didn't always look as neat and as complete as this fellow does. You can't quite see his helmet there. I got another one I'll show you. But you can see what he's got is his cartridge box. That's what's hanging in the front. He has a firearm, which, if he had the right one, would have been a carbine. It's somewhat shorter than the regular musket. Why? Because it's easier to deal with when you're riding around on a horse. And of course, you have a saber there. He probably would have had at least 2 pistols, and sometimes they would have saddle holsters on the horses, so you would have 2 more. Don't forget, these are all single shot, and you have to reload it with loose powder and all that stuff. So once you've fired, reloading is not easy, but the sword would then come into play. This one, I think you can see the headgear a little bit better. This is the jockey cap, which I mentioned. Initially, most of them are in this jacked leather, which was boiled. However, I think it was 1779, maybe 80, the French sent over a supply of their dragoon helmets, which were made out of a light brass. This is what he has. And that comb that goes along the top, that's not just decorative. That's in case you're in a saber duel, because you've fired all your single-shot weapons, and somebody goes at you with his saber. It gives the head added protection. Now, Tallmadge has a lot of work in store for him. He's in command of a troop, and each a dragoon regiment had basically 4 troops, and they were approximately 80 men, sometimes 90, depending. And of course, as people died and that kind of thing, they might go down considerably from the 80, which was authorized. One of the things he's got to do is he's got to get equipment for his men, which means he's going to have to scramble for money, and he's always scrambling for money. Another thing which he's got to do is got to get horses. You got to get the right kind of horses. They got to be fairly big horses, but then even when you get them, you have to train them. A horse is not necessarily ready for the kind of duty which it's going to be expected to perform, and so Tallmadge, actually has a corral instructed, and he begins to train with some of his subordinates and new horses to train the horses for battle. Another thing he's got to deal with is smallpox, which is a real plague, through the 17th, 18th century. You all know the effect it had to Native American tribes. However, it is also very deadly for the white population as well, which is sometimes, I think, overlooked. And the smallpox begins to break out in North America, and it's affecting the Army. Washington, who actually had a small case of smallpox in his youth. There are some portraits, by the way, where you can see this pock marks. He didn't have a bad case. Some people, they look like they've been hit with a shotgun if they survived it. It was a very serious disease. But what Washington orders is the entire army must be inoculated. And that's one of Tallmadge's jobs, is to make sure. So, when spring arrives and you have the campaigning season, it's hard to fight 18th century wars in the winter for reasons I think you can deduce. What he is, his troop is called to Washington, who is in New Jersey, and he's sort of having this kind of, face-off with Howe. Howe will make a move to try to trap Washington into giving battle. When he does it, Washington will retreat into the mountains. Howe then pulls back. Washington comes out. Howe finally decides that this is a waste of time, and so what he decides he's going to do is to capture the colonial capital of Philadelphia. He doesn't want to have to go all the way across New Jersey, so he comes up with the idea of another amphibious landing. And the British Navy is going to transport him from New York, which is the British headquarters or nerve center throughout the entire war, and he's going to move his forces down around the southern tip of Maryland, up the Chesapeake Bay, and land at what is today approximately Elkton, Maryland, and from there he's going to push on to Philadelphia. He figures this is the fastest way to do it. Unfortunately, the weather says no. and the British fleet is essentially becalmed, and it takes them almost a month to do so. And by that time, Washington can see exactly, where he is going to go, and he is positioned just outside of Philadelphia, along approximately where Chad's Ford is today, along Brandywine Creek. And on September 11, 1777, there will be a battle between Washington and Howe. And actually, it plays out somewhat like the Battle of Brooklyn. Washington thinks he has all the fords guarded. No, there was one more further away, which he was not informed about. Howe is informed about it, gets his men across, and they're coming down again on the Army's flank. Washington has to pull back, evacuates Philadelphia, which the British will occupy in the winter of 1777, 1778, and he's on the outskirts. He comes up in December with the idea of clipping off a piece of Howe's army, which was positioned approximately 5 miles from the center of Philadelphia. It's called Germantown. All right, today it's simply part of North Philadelphia. And Washington figures we can take this out and force Howe into a more defensive position. And Tallmadge is going to be involved in this. All right, and the battle is launched, and everything goes to hell fairly quickly. There was a lot of fog. There's friendly fire, which is going on. Some troops get lost on the paths they're supposed to take. And also, some of the actually better ones, sorry, I'm trying to get this, get caught up in trying to capture a British position in a place called Cliveden, which is still there. The house is there. The neighborhood is not great, but you can still visit if you want. It was a stone house. The British, dug in, and you can see in this rendition, the Continentals try. Sometimes they get through, they get into the lobby, they're fighting hand to hand, and the British counterattack and drive. This goes back and forth. In the meantime, Howe finds out what's going on. He sends reinforcements to the beleaguered British, and they begin to roll the Americans back. And after they begin to get rolled back, they begin, truthfully, to break out into pretty much a panicked retreat. Washington calls upon Tallmadge to position his horsemen across one of the main roads and try to stop them from doing so. His idea, if you can hold them for a while and reorganize them, maybe we can still get something out of this. Tallmadge does as instructed, but they're not stopping that day. They will come back, they always do, but that day they've about had it. And so what happens is Tallmadge is going to spend most of the winter of 1777 into 1778 on almost continual picket duty, protecting Washington's winter quarters, which are at Valley Forge, from any kind of British attack, and also trying to find out what the British are up to. And these are fairly small, but very nasty, bloody engagements. They don't even have the dignity of a battle, so they're usually like 30 to 40 men on each side. And sometimes he's the hammer, and sometimes he's the anvil. But at one point, he writes a letter to his friend Jeremiah Wadsworth, who is becoming a major wheeler dealer in Hartford, and he says, I haven't had my boots off for 10 days, and allowing for a certain amount of exaggeration. It's probably pretty much true. Meanwhile, by the way, his brother Samuel has a different experience. He's at the Battle of Saratoga, but that's another story, which, as you know, is a British defeat, first big American victory, and brings France in the war, changing many things. At any rate, when spring appears, Washington sends Tallmadge to essentially a position in the Hudson Highlands, upper Westchester County, adjacent Connecticut. In some ways, very close to home, and also where he's going to spend a large part of the war. What's his job? Protect the Hudson Highlands as much as possible from any unexpected British attack, incursion, raid, whatever the case may be, because there were major supply depots for the Continental Army, places like Fishkill, Peekskill, what am I forgetting? West Point. How could I forget West Point? At any rate, there are other ones as well. And he's almost in constant operations at this point. And also, he's dueling again with a lot of British cavalry and British horsemen. I might point out that after Germantown, most of the British troops that Tallmadge is going to be facing off against are Americans. They're Tory units, including this one. This guy isn't an American. He was British, but he commanded a Tory unit, which was called the British Legion. This is a fellow by the name of Bannister Tarleton, who a friend of mine once called the pretty boy. He may be pretty, but he was very lethal. He was very aggressive, and he was frequently very feared for good reason. At any rate, Tarleton had been in almost all of these actions up to this point, and what he wanted to do was to see if he could launch a surprise attack and take out a significant American force. And he hears about one. They were called the Second Continental Dragoons, and they were posted in Pound Ridge. I guess that's northeast Westchester, and Tarleton sets out from the base camp approximately where today's Yonkers is, and he sets off. By the way, the British had done at least 2 of these kind of attacks in the preceding months, and they were very, very lethal. At any rate, so Tarleton's coming. Tallmadge has got a fair amount of experience at this point, and he tells his colonel, who doesn't have this kind of thing, we got to post some guards up there, and the colonel, his name is Sheldon, says, no one's coming out now. It's getting late. Not only that, the weather's turning, it's getting raining, all that kind of stuff. And Tallmadge is thinking, we really ought to do something. Dawn breaks, and he goes back to the colonel. He says, we've got to send out some kind of squad to see what's coming at us. And Sheldon says, we don't need to do that. Tallmadge saddles up. He goes out to see what's coming. He's not gone a quarter of a mile when he sees Tarleton bearing down on them at breakneck speed. He rushes back to Pound Ridge to sound the alarm, but all the dragoons can basically do is saddle up and get out of there. There is some gunfire, but not a great deal. Tarleton eventually is driven off by the arrival of American infantry, but he's fairly satisfied with himself. And he's got a souvenir. Well, here's his souvenir. He finds the colors of the Second Continental Dragoons. Actually, it wasn't in battle. It was in the house because they had all been, laying around resting. But he captures it. He brings it back. He captured another flag in the northern campaigns, and he captured 2 more in the southern campaigns. This was sold with the other 3 in 2008 by Sotheby's, and they went for somewhat north of $7 million. All right. They don't make them anymore. At any rate, but this is one reason why this looks as nice as it does, because, he captured it, he kept it, he sent it back to England, et cetera. However, you can't have a unit without, your own colors, and this is the second pattern flag which the Second Continental Dragoons had. Originally, the blue would have been deeper, but at any rate, this one survives the war. It's at the Connecticut Historical Society, and last year there was an exhibition at the Museum of the American Revolution in Philadelphia. How many of you ever been there? All right, good. All right, put it on your must list or something like that. But they had an exhibition of Revolutionary War flags, and this was one which was there. And you can see, how they did the 13, stripes. By the way, there's nothing on the line of a Betsy Ross flag, which dates to the Revolutionary War. All right, there are some things in pictures at the time which sort of look like it, but that's something which comes along a little bit later. All right, so what's Tallmadge doing? He's doing a number of things, one of which is he's got the job of trying to defend northern and, if he can, central Westchester from British incursions. All right, and so he's constantly dueling, usually with Tory units. He also, particularly in the winter, has to figure out where's he getting money to pay his men, where's he getting more horses, where's he getting more supplies, et cetera, et cetera. And George gives him another, let's say, duty to perform in 1778, and that is to open up an intelligence operation which would be centered on Long Island. And I think everybody knows what that is. This is what comes to be known as the Culper Network or the Culper Organization, that kind of thing. Tallmadge was not the first guy who was supposed to set this up. It was somebody else, but Washington turned to him. And he was logical for a couple of reasons, one of which he was a native Long Islander. He still had family there. He knew all kinds of people there, had friends there, and he could call upon these people to supply intelligence. And the idea was that you could collect intelligence mostly in Manhattan, although there were British forts, scattered throughout Kings and even into western Suffolk County. And then that information could be taken to sort of a clearinghouse in Setauket, Tallmadge's old hometown, and then transported across the Sound. Tallmadge would pick it up and he would convey it to Washington. All right, so he creates a network primarily based upon his friends, okay? Caleb Brewster, who already is getting a reputation as a guy who likes raiding on Tory positions, crossing the Sound back and forth. He's going to become a major courier. He calls upon another neighbor, Abraham Woodhull, in Setauket, a farmer, all right? And he often has reason to go in Manhattan selling produce. The British and their headquarters have an enormous appetite for food and lumber, timber. They need it to keep their armies going. Woodhull will in turn recruit a guy by the name of Robert Tallmadge. Robert Townsend. And he is an Oyster Bay resident, but he's a merchant. He's got a mercantile establishment in Manhattan, and he's right next to a coffee house, which is frequented by British officers. So what happens, Woodhull has to do less traveling into Manhattan, which always fills them with anxiety. Townsend will supply most of the information. It'll be sent by couriers to Setauket, and then it will be conveyed across the Sound. Tallmadge will create what later becomes known as tradecraft. He'll create a code system, for example, based on numbers, and you can find lists of these. The only number I can think of right now is 721, which was his number. So if there's 721 in a letter, you're referring to himself, but all the principals, also places and things like that, had their numbers. Additionally, they use pseudonyms or nom de guerre, all right? And so this is how you get the Culpers, all right? Woodhull becomes Culper Sr., Townsend becomes Culper Jr., and Tallmadge himself assumes the name John Bolton. Right, and so on these letters, sometimes you'll see Culper Sr. said to Culper Jr. And then there are numbers all over the place. Additionally, they had an invisible ink. All right, and so if you get into these letters, and a lot of them are preserved because they go to Washington and they're in his papers, and some of them show up in different places, all right, you can frequently see that there's all kinds of stuff on these letters. Washington, by the way, said he never wanted to know the real identities of the agents. And I should point out one other thing, Tallmadge has other people working for him who aren't part of this particular network, which I think is sometimes ignored. Also, Washington has spies who directly appoint to him. At any rate, from approximately 1778 to the end of the war, there is this stream of information which is coming to Washington from Tallmadge and his various networks. Tallmadge is also going to get involved in something else involving espionage, and this is the treason of Benedict Arnold. And one thing you have to remember, when this breaks in 1780, it is an absolutely stunning shock to practically all of the pro-revolutionaries in North America, whether they're in the army or not. Arnold was considered the best combat general in the Continental Army. He had a very distinguished record, very aggressive. There were all kinds of books as to what causes him to turn coat. But certainly it has something to do with his ambition and the fact that he continually felt slighted. by both Congress and sometimes even by the Army, though Washington's always trying to buck him up. It probably played some role that he married a Tory woman when he was stationed in Philadelphia after the British evacuated it at the beginning of 1778. At any rate, Arnold is in contact with Sir Henry Clinton, who had replaced Howe in Manhattan. They go back and forth. They work out a deal for what rank he's going to get and how much money he's going to get and what's he going to give in exchange. He had asked Washington for command of West Point, and Washington was a little bit puzzled by this. This is a combat man. Why does he want to be a garrison commander? But okay, if that's what you want, you can get it. And the idea was he would turn over all the plans to West Point, the fortifications, the troop strength, all of that kind of stuff, so that a British force, would be able to seize it, certainly with relatively few casualties. And the British believed this would unlock the entire, Patriot hold on the Hudson River Valley and everything that portended. The guy who was doing the negotiations for Clinton was a fellow by the name of Arnold-Andre. He was the adjutant general of the British Army in Manhattan. And when they were ready to finalize the deal, so to speak, all right, Arnold said, Andre has to come up and meet me. And they were going to meet on the west side of the Hudson River, approximately around Haverstraw. Andre comes up on a British vessel called the Vulture, gets rowed to shore, and meets with Arnold. Arnold, this is a depiction of, obviously an artist's imagination, though probably something like that happened. Arnold gives him all these documents which, he requires. And Andre, I don't think had to give him any paper. He just had to say that, Sir Henry agrees to your price and terms, and we will let you know when we're coming, that kind of thing. However, in the meantime, by pure accident, the British ship that took Andre up the Hudson had to withdraw, and he couldn't get back to it. And so Arnold says, okay, I'll write you a pass, and you go back through our lines, all right, which extend about halfway up Westchester on a regular basis. These things are fluid. Sometimes they're all over the place. At any rate, but if you with this pass, you can get back. However, you better not wear your uniform. Andre's wearing his uniform when he comes to see Arnold. And Arnold convinces him not to do it, or take it off and put on this civilian jacket. And of course, if you're caught as a civilian engaging in espionage, the penalty is death, all right? But at the time, they don't see it's a problem. Andre crosses the Hudson. He's going down the east side of the Hudson. He is stopped by militiamen at Tarrytown. They are, a little bit dubious about his pass, although it's signed by Arnold, and he's a big man. But they also see these other papers. Why all these detachments? Why all these fortifications? And so they send him to the nearest dragoon headquarters. And at the time, Tallmadge was off reconnoitering down toward the Bronx, or what is today the Bronx. And the guy in charge there looked at this stuff, but he saw Arnold's name, and he says, okay, what's your name? And Andre says, my name is John Anderson. See, it's on the pass. Okay, I'm going to send you back to Arnold, and I'm going to write a letter as to how you were captured, but I'll keep these other documents. All right. Tallmadge comes to headquarters, and he hears this, and he's stupefied. Why did you send this guy with this incriminating evidence, this really suspicious stuff, back to the guy who gave him the pass? The reason was it was Arnold's name, it was the effect of it. But Tallmadge writes about this sort of obliquely as the rest of his life. But you can see, you can almost see coming off the pages that he can't believe. He's just exasperated that he can't get this guy to do anything. Finally, the guy who ranked him, he was a lieutenant colonel, said, okay, we'll bring back Anderson, but the letter explaining his capture goes to Arnold, all right? So what happens is Arnold gets the letter and realizes this thing is blown, and he takes off. But Anderson's still a captive. And Tallmadge is watching him, and he begins to believe this guy is a military man. And ultimately, Anderson fesses up, and he asks Tallmadge for a piece of paper and a pencil. I'm sorry, probably pen and ink. And he writes a letter to Washington saying who he is. I'm Major John Andre, Adjutant General of the British Army. I was on a mission from... He seems to think that this would be considered a normal military operation, and Washington would understand. They see him as a spy. And immediately, Washington convenes a court-martial. During this time, Tallmadge is in charge physically of Andre, conveys him first to West Point. Washington, by the way, refuses to meet him. All right, takes him down to a place called Old Tappan, which is just across the New Jersey border. And here he has a trial, and he is convicted. He drew this... You can't see the legend on it. He drew this picture of himself the night before his execution. Tallmadge conveys him up to the place of execution, which you can still see. He's not there anymore. In the 1820s, the British had him exhumed, a fancy word for it being dug up, and they brought him back to England, and he is now in Westminster Abbey. By the way, Arnold will later send a letter to Tallmadge trying to get him to change sides, which obviously he does not do, and he goes right to Washington with it. Now, so all of this stuff is going on, but Tallmadge is also getting involved in other things, and this is something which is called, or becomes later called, the Whaleboat War. After these vessels, all right, which are usually around 20 feet long. Sometimes they were fitted with a sail, and occasionally a small swivel gun would come out the top. And these were the preferred vessels for raiders from Connecticut, usually pro-Patriot, attacking Tory positions on Long Island. But there are also Tories and British who used them in the reverse, going back and attacking Patriot positions in Connecticut. And as the war proceeded, a lot of times it didn't matter what they said their side was. They were mostly looking for loot. But not our friend Tallmadge. Tallmadge makes 3 raids or major raids during his career. The one out on the far right, that's an earlier one that was returned Jonathan Meigs. He attacked a British fort at Sag Harbor and destroyed it. But Tallmadge is interested in a couple of places. If you see where it says Lloyd's up on Lloyd's Neck, the British had a fort up there called Fort Franklin, which they had for most of the war. And it commanded really all the approaches to Cold Spring Harbor and Oyster Bay, where you could obviously have your own ships, ready to sail. And a lot of the Tory whaleboat raiders operated under the protection of Fort Franklin's guns. And Tallmadge decided in 1778 that he was going to attack it and take it out. And he assembled a force of about 80 men, some from the dragoons, some of them were Long Island refugees to Connecticut. They crossed that night, they cleared out the Tory camp, burnt their boats, took their stock supplies and everything, and they got back to Connecticut. Later, he will launch another one, which you can see sort of the second to the right, all right, leaving from Fairfield. This is 1780. This is shortly after all the Arnold-Andre kind of, what shall we call it, uproar. And he had heard from one of his agents, not a culper, that the British had built a fort, you can see it down on the South Shore, called Fort George, because it was on the manor of St. George. And by the way, the British were also Tories. All right, these are Tory units at Fort Franklin. There's almost all Tories in this kind of situation. And Tallmadge rides to Washington, and he says, General, there's a fort down there. I can sail across. I can go across the island, and I can take it and destroy it. They're sending vessels out from that, and they're scouring the area, etc. And George says no. And he says no because, look, you have to cross the Sound at one of its widest points. You got to cross the island. You got to capture the fort. Want to make a lot of noise. You got to recross the island. Then you got to recross the Sound. There are too many places you could be cut off. Tallmadge says, and he crosses himself to Long Island. By the way, he does this at various times, all right, simply for his own purposes. Has one of his agents take him across. He reconnoiters Fort St. George, and he also depicts it on a map. So and he says he knows exactly where everybody is, or exactly what all their fortifications are, etc. He also noticed on his way back that the British had been assembling a huge supply of hay at Coram. And again, everything is horse-drawn or mule-drawn or maybe donkey, but not much of that. All right, so you need hay for all of these horses which you're using. And so Tallmadge goes back to Washington and says, look, I've reconnoitered, look, here's a map. And not only that, there's this hay there. George says, okay, you do it, but remember, the primary objective is the hay. The fort's a secondary, concern. And Ben says, yeah. All right, and so, again, he puts together a force. I don't know how to make this thing go back. All right, let's see. Yeah, okay. Again, of approximately 100, 105 men. They leave from Fairfield. They have to go further east, because they go further east on the island. They cross the Sound. They wait for a day in the rain. Then they cross the island. They attack the fort at 4:30 a.m., and it's November. And they scream as they charge across the fort's defenses, Washington and glory. You can't make this stuff up. They pretty much take control of it with 15 or 20 minutes. Some of the Tories are killed. Most of them are captured. They burn everything they cannot take with them. They also burn a sloop, which was getting ready to sail. And you can see them off on the side in the Carmens River. They cross the island. Tallmadge, Brewster, and a couple other guys, they get horses. They burn the hay at Coram. And then they return to the coast. They were at what is today Mount Sinai. They go back to Connecticut. They had one man wounded. It was a small battle, but a big success in a year where the Continental forces, the revolutionary forces, aren't getting much good news. You can take a look at what's going on in 1780. Savannah goes, Charleston goes, a main army in Camden, South Carolina is pretty much wrecked. Tallmadge will also organize a raid at a place called Fort Slongo, which is the original spelling of Fort Salonga today. This was a blockhouse, and again, it was a position for Tories. And what are these guys doing? They're chopping wood for firewood and also to build huts and things for the British forces further to the west. You can see how the map, which actually was given to him by a Northport resident, and in the center of it, there was a blockhouse. This is not the blockhouse, but blockhouses followed a very kind of a set pattern, and gives you an idea of what it would have looked like in the middle of this thing. Just before they're ready to go, Captain Lemuel Truscott comes and says, Ben, I've never been on one of these things. Can I lead this expedition? And Tallmadge says, okay. So Tallmadge organizes it, but he doesn't actually lead it. He does, however, it's a very interesting document, write out what you might call a set of instructions as to how to lead a cross-sound raid, and he gives it to Truscott, and Truscott pulls it off. He attacks at dawn, all right, overwhelms the garrison. Some of them got away by jumping over what is a kind of fencing called abatis, but most of them were captured. About two of them were killed. I think one of them was left because he was mortally wounded. Again, they bring off what they can load into their whaleboats, but some things they had to leave. Tallmadge is organizing one more raid late in the war, which I'm going to skip over in the interests of time. Toward the last couple of years in the war, one of the things he's doing, he's practically leading a kind of a marine naval force, and his job is to interrupt what was illegal to both the British and the Continental Congress, trade between citizens of Connecticut, generally pro-Patriot, and citizens of Long Island, could be Patriot, might not be, but what's going from the British area are finished goods, increasingly luxury goods. And what's coming from Connecticut, is agricultural supplies. The British need food. They need fodder. They need this badly. And Tallmadge is going with his forces, including, again, Caleb Brewster is involved in a lot of this stuff. He's involved with capturing some of these ships and their cargoes. And this is very lucrative, all right? And this is a notice. They call it a libel there. It's not the libel we usually think of, which is a kind of a slander. It's a kind of a maritime law term. You capture a prize, that is the enemy's ship. You bring it into port. You can sell everything that's on it. And you can see up there that this is settled in favor of Major Benjamin Tallmadge and others. These are the men he sends out. They all get a piece of the action. All right. Since he's the commander, he gets the biggest piece. It's like, the whaling voyages. The owner's got, most of the biggest chunk of profits, and then it goes to the captain, then it goes to the first mate, et cetera. This is the way it worked. But this is one way in which he got money, often hard money. He also, by the way, invested in privateers. Privately owned vessels preying on the British, and he accumulated money that way. He also was engaged in financial transactions, which were aided by his friend Jeremiah Wadsworth in Hartford, who was operating what I called a military financial, nexus up there. And he gets all kinds of advanced warning or notice as to when different currencies in different states are sending out money and that kind of thing are going to be traded in for better money. And when the war comes to an end, he has money. He has hard money. And one of the things he does with it is he will purchase the paper money and particularly bounties, which were given to Continental soldiers throughout the war, and particularly when they were discharged. When the Army was discharged, in 1783, troops were let go rapidly in quick numbers, and one reason was because the government had no money. So a lot of these guys got these bounty certificates. In other words, you're entitled to a piece of land in upstate New York or Ohio, all right? The fact that somebody else might be there is not a problem, but this is what you are entitled to after the war. But a lot of these guys, they're privates and sergeants and things. They're going home. They have no tools. They have no seed. They have nothing to start a life with, but they got these certificates. But Tallmadge has hard money, and so he'll exchange it. And of course, the rates are very favorable. It is true. He's taken a chance. Suppose the whole experiment fails, all right? But he believes it won't. And he's right. And this is one of the reasons why he will become a very wealthy man after the Revolutionary War. Shortly after the war, by the way, this is a miniature, 1784. It's one of the nicest ones, I think. In fact, the original is out at the Long Island Museums right now. It's borrowed from the Litchfield Historical Society, but it gives you another idea of what he looks like. He doesn't have his nice helmet, I'm sorry to say, but you can see the rest of his uniform. He moves to Litchfield. He had become familiar with Litchfield, Connecticut, up in the northwest corner. He'd become familiar with it during the war, and he thought this would be a good place to set up a business and a home. But before he moves up there, he marries the daughter of William Floyd, signer of the Declaration of Independence, major landowner in Suffolk County, and he takes his bride up to Litchfield with him. He opens up what is usually referred to as a store, but it really functions as much like a bank and a land office as a store, although he does sell goods, and he does very well with it. Here you can see him in the 1790s, all right? Proportions aren't quite right, but you get the picture. Here he is living the life of a gentleman. That's his son, William, who died as a young man. That device he's wearing with the blue and white stripe and the pendant, that's the medal, or if you prefer, decoration of the Society of the Cincinnati. This was an organization of Revolutionary War officers. All right, so it provided him with a little bit of a additional boost. This is his wife, Mary Floyd. And let's see, on the floor, I think, is Maria, and that's Henry, who is in her lap. Boys frequently wore dresses until they were 3 or 4 years old. Supposedly, this went back to an old folk tale that, the fairies will grab, boy babies and they'll put one of their own in the crib, and you have this creature called a changeling, which isn't fun. But if you put the boy in a skirt, the fairies would be fooled. I think it just made changing easier. At any rate, this is the house he bought. He bought it from a brother of his, Colonel Sheldon. It's still in existence. By the way, it looks better. I have to go up there and take another picture or find another one. This is like 10, 12 years old, and when I was there, I took it. The house had just been sold, and as you can see, the paint is peeling. It's not peeling now. It's a very nice house. He goes into politics. He's a congressman from 1800 to 1818 in the Federalist Party. Picks a bad time because the Federalists are going out of business. Opposes the War of 1812. Doesn't like Thomas Jefferson. Hates and fears Andrew Jackson. Devotes himself to philanthropy and religious activities more than anything else. This is the last known depiction of him. This is 1825. He dies in 1835, a highly respected, highly, what shall we say, honored resident of not only his town and county, but also of Connecticut, and even through large parts of the country. He is buried in the East Side Cemetery in Litchfield, and if you're up there, Litchfield's a neat little village. I kind of like it, but stop by and say hello to him. He's quiet, but I know he appreciates it. At any rate, he's a guy. When I wrote the book that I'll show you in just a minute, the title I had for it was "The Talented Major Tallmadge." Benjamin Tallmadge in the Revolutionary War. The publishers didn't think that would catch on. People wouldn't know who he was. But I thought the talented Major Tallmadge worked because he's doing everything. I mean, he does enrich himself during the war, that's true. All right, but also he devotes himself to the cause through thick and thin, and he's there from virtually the beginning to the end. He does espionage, he does big battles, he does small battles. All right, he engages in spy chasing. He even creates a small, sort of naval fleet to go out in the Sound and capture vessels. So he is a remarkable guy. His brothers don't have such a happy post-revolutionary experience, although their experiences during the war are neat. If you want to find out more about Ben, this is the title that we eventually came up with, and they wanted something sort of dramatic, so I threw in Commando, which I know is anachronistic, but he actually is acting like what we think of as commandos or Rangers or Marine Recon or whatever the case may be throughout a large part of the war. And shameless plug, I have some available if you're interested. And I'll even sign it. If you prefer I don't, that's fine too, okay? If you want me to sign it Rick Atkinson, I'll do that too. All right, I'm told that we should do it this way. Any questions here, and then it's supposed to be open to anybody who might be watching this online. Yes?
I can't remember Benjamin Tallmadge's wife's name. Nancy?
Peggy Shippen.
Peggy Shippen.
Yeah. She's an interesting story. It's also an interesting story how Washington and his officers, when they went to Arnold's quarters, and she was still there, basically how she slowed them down from pursuing Arnold. They probably couldn't have captured them anyway, but you can look into that. Well, I was either very good or very bad. I don't know. Well, here's one over here.
What party did you say he was a member of?
He was a Federalist. Not a surprise. Most of the Continental officers became Federalists. By no means all. but most of them did. Washington, although he tried to avoid party labels, by his second term, he's definitely a Federalist. But by 1800, the Federalists were going into a decline. In 1800, you couldn't see how deep it would go. They were basically extinct by certainly the 1820s. Yes. Why? The Federalists identified themselves far too strongly, with the wealthier classes, and the mercantile classes, and they took a hard line about certain things in the Whiskey Rebellion and stuff like that. And most of them opposed the War of 1812. They were strongest in New England, and the interesting thing about the War of 1812, it was supposedly fought because the British were seizing American ships and impressing American sailors. Most of these were coming from New England, and the New Englanders, most of them didn't want the war because regardless of that, they were making too much money. But that's not the only reason. The approach of the Jeffersonians and later the Jacksonians pretty much appalled Tallmadge and the Old Federalists. Yes.
How did Major Tallmadge feel about the hanging of Andre?
He was actually very shaken by Andre. He became very fond of him. And on the one hand, he recognized he had to go. I mean, if they could have got Arnold, they would have hanged Arnold. In fact, Washington actually sends a guy out to try to kill Arnold. Arnold sticks in his craw. But Andre was a young, very affable, very erudite, very accomplished, polished kind of guy. And I think he was also trying to play some of the American officers, that they'd sort of become to identify with him, or at least developed a soft spot for him that he might avoid the hanging. But in fact, Tallmadge says he practically burst into tears at the hanging, but he did it. By the way, Woodhull sends him a letter and says, tries to bring him back to earth. He says, it's too bad about Major Andre, but it was better the plot was foiled. He meant your ruin, and he did. Yes. You can ask as many as you like.
Repeat the question.
Okay.
The culpers by association, after the war, did he have relationships with those people anymore?
With who, the culprits? All right, the question is, did Tallmadge have any contact with any of the culprits? He certainly does with Caleb Brewster. They invest in Tory lands, and I'm going to guess at the times he went to Setauket. They have a big feast, on the Setauket Green, that he certainly talks to them. But what they spoke about, is hard to say. He says almost nothing about it in his memoirs, and he never reveals their identities. Yes.
Can you tell me the significance and use of those blockhouses?
The blockhouse is simply a very strong defensive position because it's made pretty solidly, and you'd usually have a ditch around it. And around the ditch, you would have these pointed poles, which are called abatis. So you have to cut your way through that before you can even get to the blockhouse. That site, by the way, Fort Slongo, it's still there. It's on private property. The only thing you can see is the ditch around where the blockhouse was. Yes?
Please, any known ancestors of Tallmadge that are known today?
Ancestors?
Descendants.
Oh, descendants. Right now, I can't think of one. Through the 19th century, there are some. So, for example, I think it was his grandson who paid for the Sons of the American Revolution to get Francis Tavern. And I was told, although nobody pointed me in their direction, that there are still Tallmadge descendants in the Society of Cincinnati and Connecticut. I spoke before them once, but none of them showed up. I don't know. Maybe they were afraid of what I was going to say. I don't know. Yes? Of the Cradle of Aviation? Okay. All right. Excellent. I did not know that.
Okay, so I don't know whether there are any questions on the Zoom or not.
I have one if you can hear me.
Guess not.
Can you hear me? I have one.
I want to thank everyone again and thank Richard for speaking. Carlos for assisting with the AV, Betsy Murphy, our hospitality chair, Historical Society trustee, and she's the local history librarian here at Jericho Library, and she has an exhibit on Tallmadge upstairs, I'm told. Thank the library for their partnership on these programs. As I mentioned, the reception is just turn left when you leave the hall, and there are refreshments there. Richard has copies of the Tallmadge book, $20. He also has copies of the 2 books on World War I, and those are $20, or 2 for 3 on those. 2 for 3. 2 for $30. Sorry. And if you want your passport signed, you see Gary. I will give you a copy of our journal, a different copy than this one, but out there. That's a privilege of membership. Our next program is on Sunday, June 14th. On the Battle of Long Island by someone who has written on a couple of the officers there, not Tallmadge, other officers. So please enjoy the refreshments, and again, thank you all for coming. That was great, Richard.
Thank you. Let's see if I can remember how to do this.
Get your flash drive.
Wasn't Jeremiah Wadsworth
Pardon?
wasn't Jeremiah Wadsworth also the commissary chief?
He was, yeah.
Because I ended up, when I was getting my master's, having to go up and write on Jeremiah Wadsworth and go into the And then another thing is, I haven't read the British are coming, but I did get to hear Rick Atkinson speak, and he was speaking on World War II.
Oh, yeah, he did a trilogy on World War II.
Yeah, and my brother had something, Rick Atkinson spoke of that. He is fascinating. He just goes on and on and on. I just love listening to that. But I was so excited when you said Jeremiah Wadsworth, and I just thought if he was the commissary chief, we were talking about the other things that he
Oh, that's just one of the things he does. He becomes the basically the purchasing agent for the French, and so he gets hard money and value. But he's wheeling and dealing and everything.
everything, but I was just like, oh, Jeremiah Wadsworth, nobody.
But go back and write some more on him.
That was a long time ago, but I actually said to Rick, I was talking to Rick Atkinson, and I said something about Jeremiah Wadsworth, because I know Jeremiah Wadsworth. You know, he gets so into his characters. It's characters, the people that he's researching. It's like he knows them, and he was like, I know him. And then you said it too, so very few people have ever heard of Jeremiah Wadsworth.
Yeah, but here you are, and yeah.
Hearing it many years in.
Yeah, I've even seen somebody wrote on something that, if you really want to find out what was going on, during the Revolution, at least in the Northeast, you got to know about what Jeremiah Wadsworth is up to.
That's very interesting.
All right, get back to it.
Yeah, right. Thank you. It was very interesting.
Thank you for coming. I'll be right there. Okay. Wait a minute. Oh, I see.
If they didn't hear us.